September 25th. Some of you may be the member of the Aging Gerontology Research Interest and Implementation Group, or we call it GRICS. Our research strategic plan, we have 3 strategic plan focused on the promote the advancement of the research for the care of older individuals using innovative approach and technology and facilitate networking opportunity and inspiration. For example, today, the 2 speakers can inspire you how to write the grant and how to work and share the experience as a postdoctoral fellow, scholar, or something like that. And I'm Lada Tiamong as a chair, and then Unit Ojo, she is a co-chair for this group. Keep in mind that some of you may know that we need another co-chair. If you volunteer and would like to be, please contact me, okay? We want to have, and this is my last year, so next year Unit gonna be chair, and then the co-chair gonna be the co-chair number 2 gonna be co-chair number 1, and then next gonna be, so the chair have 2-year term, okay? And then this year we devote to have 2 webinars. This the first one, and then September 25th gonna focus on the method in research and recruitment. And we have a bi-monthly meeting, the 4th of Wednesday from noon to 1. So if you want to have lunch and want to talk with us and want to join to the group, just let me know. I can send the invitation, and we have meet via team. So next time we're gonna meet July 24th to talk about the symposium that several asked. From the last meeting, we plan to have submit several symposium together, several topics. Dr. Kalisha Barnes Johnson, she is assistant professor at Emory University. And Dr. Barnes Johnson, you may introduce yourself later on, okay? I just try to be introduced a little bit, but she have very strong track record, and her research focus on the caregiving experience for the especially the African American dementia diet, how that linked to the quality of life. And she have her postdoctoral fellowship to enhance the doctoral dissertation to focus on the African American, but look more in the decision-making process, that how that affect to the quality of life. And you can contact Dr. Bond. You can see in that her email here already. And she will part of our aging research group too. And Dr. Catherine Britt, she is a postdoctoral fellow at the Penn Nursing. And both of them have common target, common focus on the older people who have cognitive impairment and dementia. That's good thing to see it. But Dr. Britt expand more and use a secondary data analysis and look at the sleep and the other thing, for example, on the spiritual and religious practice. And she can talk more about this. And next webinar, September 25th, Dr. Lash gonna talk about the research method and data set that she have big data, and she's enjoy working with the team performing quality control of the data set. And I think she may update her new organization that she's gonna work with, but sorry, Dr. Lash, that is still using your old organization. Okay, I'm done with introduction. I'm so very excited to invite Dr. Britt and Dr. Bond Johnson to share her experience and inspiration for us. I'm stop sharing. Please feel free to share your PowerPoint. And if you have any question, feel free to put in the chat unit, and I'm gonna help monitoring the chat. Okay.
Thank you, Lada. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a second. All right, can y'all see that okay? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you everyone. Welcome to today's presentation and discussion on writing and submitting K Career Development Awards and other grants. We're glad you joined us, and we look forward to today's discussion. So Kalisha and I will share some of our experience with you and what we've learned along the way, including input from our peers, mentors, and colleagues on this topic. And as Lada mentioned, I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow on a T32 in the New Cortland Center for Transitions in Health at the University of Pennsylvania in the School of Nursing. And Dr. Bonds is an assistant professor at Emory University in the School of Nursing. So we'll present some slides today, some of which have some pre-written questions that we will answer. If you do have a question, please enter it into the chat. We will answer questions towards the end of the presentation, and we hope to have some great discussion. So today, this is just kind of an overview of what we'll cover. First, what K awards that we applied for and where we each are in this process. Then we'll share an introduction about the session today, followed by some common questions that we get asked. We'll share some NIH and other resources with you, followed by a time for question and discussion with everyone. And if we have additional time after the discussion and questions, we can always share some more insights. So I study spirituality and mental health in older adults, like Lada mentioned, in those with mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and their caregivers. And so where I am in this process is I submitted a K23, which is I submitted a 5-year proposal to the NIA in February of this year that's focused on co-designing a meditation intervention with diverse older adults with mild cognitive impairment and their caregivers to support cognitive health. And then Kalisha, do you want to share where you are?
I submitted a K23, a 5-year K23 to the National Institute on Aging, or NIA, in September of 2021, and it was funded. So I am in the 3rd year of my K, and getting ready to do an RPPR, which is just your progress report for the year. There was a little bit of a caveat because I have a son while I was on my K, so I did take some time off, but we can discuss that at a different point in the presentation about how to navigate it. So in my mind, it feels like it's year 2, even though in real life it's year 3.
Yeah, thank you.
And then to get us started, again, you know, one thing about being a nurse scientist, about being a researcher, is that we write a lot. Writing grants, writing publications, it's our currency. It's how we show that we are doing what we're supposed to do. It's how we get tenures, how we get promoted. It's how all things work. So we have to really be able to write well and convey our thoughts in a wonderful way. I remember taking one of many grant writing support groups, research workshops, and the reviewer said, you want your proposal to pass the heartbeat test. And so you want to read it as a reviewer and get excited about what's being written, because you can see that it has the potential to change something really, really important, or to create something really, really useful. Next slide, please. And so again, as Kat mentioned, we have sort of these common questions, and we divided them into 3 buckets or 3 categories. So we have the National Institute of Health, specifically around NIA, so the National Institute on Aging, and NINR, the National Institute of Nursing Research. If you are submitting somewhere else, we do not have the expertise to really give you the nitty gritty. And if you are familiar across institutes, there is a little bit of nuance and some things that are different. So the one recommendation would be to make sure you connect with someone who has submitted to that institute before you submit your grant proposal. We will specifically focus on K mechanisms, again, really thinking about the K23, the K01, and the K99 ROO. There are so many other K options, but this is just kind of where our expertise lies. And then last is sort of the writing and implementing a career award. So really the nuts and bolts of writing different pieces of the K, as well as, I guess from my viewpoint, things I wish I knew or are learning along the way. I will say the K is, in my perspective, has done exactly what it's supposed to do. I've learned so much and recognized different gaps, even in my own proposal, that I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done this, or oh, I wish I would have done that. Next slide, please. So let's just get it started. I want us to create what I call a brave space. We used to say safe spaces, but I'm not sure safe spaces are really a thing. They sound good, but if I don't really know what makes you feel safe. I can't create that. But we do hope that it's a brave space for you in the sense that you feel brave enough to speak up and ask your questions or to comment if you have a suggestion or you've already been through this process. It really is more of an open dialogue and just a discussion among peers. We do not know all things, and I am always open to learning something new. So without further ado, we will jump right in with one of the common questions that we get asked. So how did you decide between the different institutions at NIH, specifically, like I said, NINR and NIA? So I wrote an F31 in my pre-doc to NINR. It was scored but not funded, and that was in my 3rd year of my PhD. So it was like we could try to resubmit and then extend my dissertation by at least another year or two. Or I could just do what I needed to do, graduate, and then use those documents to set me up for a K. And so I did the latter. I graduated after 4 years in my PhD program, and then literally pulled all my F documents and just renamed them, and then updated that information with what I had learned from my dissertation, which I think set me up really nicely. So if you're earlier in the process and are in your PhD, I'd highly recommend writing some sort of a grant, whether it's scored or not, because again, you have lots of touch points with faculty and staff supporting you, and also you have these documents that is not a blank page when you go to write the next grant. You have something tangible that you can sort of edit. Kat, anything you want to add?
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think just for me, I decided to submit to the NIA based on my topic. As I shared earlier, I focus on diverse populations with Alzheimer's disease and dementias. And so I chose the NIA because this aligns with their strategic plan. Yeah. And then let's go on to the next question. How and when do I reach out to a program officer, and how does that work? Great question. So I think, once you have a solid draft of your specific aims, which includes having already received some feedback from your mentors, and then with the time when you're ready to share those specific aims page, you can reach out to a program officer. You can ask around or email a program officer who you think your work aligns well with their expertise, and they can direct you to another PO if they feel that another PO would be a better fit for your topic. But emailing them and really sharing your specific aims page. And for me, I generally just stated what my interest was, submitting the K23 to the NIA, and that I would love to speak to them about my proposal. Sometimes it does take a while for them to get back to you, but they will, and they're happy to meet and discuss your aims and give you feedback, which is really valuable. And this is just a really helpful process to do. And like I said, they'll provide some feedback, which may include some considerations or directions for you to think about with your specific proposal and your specific aims. And they may also encourage you to speak with another NIH division just to make sure you cover all your bases. They might say, well, I would definitely encourage you to speak to this other division as well, because your topic could align with them, but they really just kind of open up options and give you more information, which is really helpful. Kalisha, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't.
Okay. And then the next question.
What is the general process for the NIH grants to be scored, rated, and then funded? What does this process look like, and how long does it take? So everything's about 3 months or so. So it's about a year-long process. And we have another slide later that sort of goes into at least the dates. So usually there are specific dates when Ks are due. There's usually another 3-month window before reviewers meet, and then there's usually another 3-month or so window before you get your scores and hear from your program officer, and then determine if it's going to be funded. I could be a little off because again, I am a few years removed, but again, just know that it is a long process. So when you are thinking about when to submit a K grant specifically, or any other grant, just recognize that it'll probably be about a year before it starts. And so what will that look like as far as where you are in your life? What is that process? feel like I answered that.
Mhm.
Anything you want to add, Kat?
Yeah, no, I think for me, I generally I'd say like what, 4 to 6 months. Like you said, it's assigned to a scientific review committee and a scientific review officer. So for me, I submitted mine in February, and I believe it's scheduled to be discussed in June. So I think that's what, 4 months later. So yeah. All
We're
right, let's
sending you
go.
good vibes.
Thanks. All right, so next slide. So this is just a helpful tool called the NIH Matchmaker. You can see that link there, and we will share these slides with you later so that you can access these links. But this is a great tool, and you can search for similar projects funded by the NIH. You can enter in your specific aims, your abstract, or your keywords, and really get a better sense of what's funded similar to your project and which institutes will be funding those projects. You can also look, organize them by school and see how many projects are funded by different institutions. And not every institute, like Kalisha mentioned, will be funding the same. You can see in this figure here, it shows the number of active projects funded across the different NIH institutes that are listed there at the bottom. So for example, if you look at the NCI, which is for cancer, that's in the yellow bar on the left. They have a lot of funding allotted to support a lot of projects, right? They have a very high bar. So you can look over and kind of see the NINR, which is, I believe it's Navy and on the right. It doesn't have as much funding to those. So those tend to be more competitive, as they may not have funding for as many people. That's just something to think about. And like Kalisha mentioned, institutes are really different from each other, different cultures and processes. So what one institute says won't be the same for all of them. And again, the best thing is just to reach out to a program officer and kind of start that discussion.
So this is the example I mentioned of where, for example, the K series, you're in cycle 1, it has a due date of February 12th, cycle 2 is a due date of June 12th, and cycle 3 is the due date of October 12th. And then of course, if you need to revise, we submit, they have dates there. Based on what cycle you enter, it will also on this website give you when to anticipate it being reviewed and when to anticipate potential start dates. That can be really helpful because when you formalize your grant proposal, you do have to give a timeline of when you anticipate doing all the different activities. And so it's nice to know when you should anticipate funding, recognizing that that will shift. I know when I was funded, I think my funding came 3 to 6 months later than anticipated. So I had a much shorter first year. And grants are not contracts. In my mind, I feel like it's a contract and I have to honor it to the letter, but there is some flexibility and wiggle room. But it's just nice to kind of have an idea of time of year so that way you can make your training plan, which is the different workshops and activities you will do alongside the research, align kind of when different things are happening.
Mm.
Anything else, Kat?
No, I think that's great. We can move on to some more questions here. I think the next question is, why did you apply for a K award?
Because I want to do research. No, why did I apply for a K award? I think it was the next logical step for me. I had submitted the F-31, like I said, scored not funded. The K made sense. So I am a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner by training. And so I have been told pretty early on in my PhD process that if I wanted to show that this research, that I was serious about this research thing, right? That I really could be a nurse scientist. I needed to solidify funding because most schools always need a psych mental health nurse practitioner to teach in the classroom. And so it was like, I need to do this. I need to show that I have a fundable idea that makes sense, that works, so that I can not necessarily not teach, because I'm not opposed to teaching, but that's just not really where my heart is. I would really love to do research and then teach to a smaller degree. And so that was why I did it for me.
I think I'll add to that. I applied for a K award to really just provide that additional training. Like you mentioned, you said you learned so much. So, I think it's really an opportunity to get additional skills to really build and project you into a career of independence, right? Being that PI and preparing you for that. And I was encouraged to write a K from my mentors in my postdoc. And my peers ahead of me had done that, and they have, successful faculty positions at great nursing schools. So it's something that I've seen others do and really find it valuable. I think for the next question.
How did you decide? Oh, that you want to lead or you want me to do it, Kat?
No, you go.
How did you decide which grant mechanism to apply for? So I think the NIH reporter is really, really helpful. If you've never heard of it, you can literally Google NIH and then reporter, like a reporter. It's kind of like NIH's Google. So you can go in and see all of the grants that have been funded. And for me, I was torn between the K99 ROO because it gives you the same 5 years, or just 2 years is the K99 piece. So it's kind of like a smaller K, and then you go into that research phase of the last 3 years. And I knew I needed several years because I am interviewing these African American dementia dyads, creating an intervention, and then piloting that intervention. And so I knew I needed longer than 3 years. But the thing is, because I am a clinician and have been a clinician for almost 20 years, at the time I submitted my K, I had only been a nurse scientist for about 2 years. And the thing about the K23 is that it really does highlight the fact that you are a clinician first, that you've noticed this clinical problem, and that you now have this PhD to support your decision to lead a research team if you have this additional training. And so it really worked well. The other thing is, I have to remind myself and other people that are in spaces, if you are not expanding a mentor's work, you are sort of carving out your own path at the intersections of your mentors. You tend to not have as many publications as someone who has joined a lab and is expanding on the work of someone else, because they have their own work as well as that lab they've joined. When you're creating a path and there isn't really anyone that you can sort of link your research to, you don't have as many publications. And so in looking at the K99 ROO, I was nowhere near as competitive as I needed to be. The same with the K01. And so the K23 for me made sense because it highlighted my career as this clinician, as this nurse practitioner who had seen and worked with these dementia dyads, and recognized there were gaps in our learning and in our knowledge.
Mm.
Before we move on, so because these are case specific questions coming through the chat, I think maybe it might be okay to hop in. So I responded to a couple of them in the chat, so look at it. But the one that just came in is, do we need to do pilot studies before applying for K awards, or should we use the K award as the pilot study for our future research trajectory? It was a little bit of both for me. I was able to use my dissertation findings, which highlighted that. So my dissertation focused specifically on African Americans. A lot of research, we compare different races and ethnicities, and I didn't want to do that. I literally wanted to focus specifically on African American dementia dyads. And in doing so, I found a finding that we hadn't seen before, that these adult daughters were struggling. Their quality of life and their parents' quality of life was worse than if they were in a partner, if the person living with dementia was in a partnered or spousal relationship, which is not what we typically see in non-Hispanic white populations. And so it was like, this is a need, this is important. I'm just going to focus on these adult daughters. And so my dissertation became the pilot work to set up my K and where I want my research to go. I think it just kind of depends on what your research topic is. Feel free to email one of us, both of us after this, to go into more detail. But a lot of times, if you have some pilot work, it's nice to have pilot work, but pilot work is not required for the K. At least that's what I've been told. Kat, what you think?
Yeah, no, I know. Like, and part of my K application, kind of made some boxes like, this is what I learned, and then the logical next step, this is what I did and learned in my postdoc, and then this is what I'm projecting to learn and to work on in my K. So you're kind of showing your progression as one kind of builds on the other. So just kind of think about that, and that basically is what you just shared, but just kind of a visual way to think about it. All right, let's go on to the next question.
You want to take this one, Kat?
Sure.
Or you want me to
Um,
take it?
you
I'm
can take,
laughing because it's like yes and no. Do
yeah.
you have to have a faculty position to submit a K? Yes and no. So you do have to have. So the reason I say yes and no is because yes, they want you to have a faculty position, but a lot of times schools won't give you the faculty position unless your K is funded. That is how Emory wrote my letter. Like upon successful funding of Kalicia's K23, she will have a faculty position. I think that's how a few institutions do that. The reviewers didn't like that. So I did get dinged a little bit in my score because it shows that the institution isn't necessarily committed to me unless I get funding. And so reviewers don't like that. But I also understand from an institution standpoint, like every K is not funded. So we can't just give out 100 assistant, we can't give out 20, I don't know, however many, so they have to sort, there's politics with it. So you do have to have a faculty position, but just know that your institution may write a letter that says, if it's funded, we will give this position, and just know that reviewers don't like that.
Hmm.
Anything you want to add there, Kat?
Yeah, no, so for me, at Penn, the department chair, had to write a letter, saying that the school fully supports my project and that I would have a position as an instructor at Penn for the K. So that basically just is what you just said as well.
Oh, nice. No, so this was like a tenure track faculty position, I think. So I
Okay.
think, so that makes sense. That might be another way to do it, where if you have different tracks at your institution, maybe there is a track that they are willing to say, yes, we commit to this applicant regardless. Where I think some tracks are like, if you got funding, we commit to you.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. All right.
And then there are different types of grants. I kind of highlighted the F31 and F30. So an F31 is where you write the proposal in your pre-doc. The F32 is where you write the proposal yourself. You have the funding and it's a postdoc. The T32 is where you apply to an institution that has funding. But again, these are all training and fellowship grants. I often say NIH couldn't spell because the career award should probably be a C08 instead of a K08. But anyway, I digress. So the career awards are where you are in a faculty position. You're saying, I'm awesome, but I still need training in these one or two places. So it's more similar to writing an F grant if you've done a grant proposal, where the research grants are very much about the research and not about you not about a training plan, where the career development awards and both F and Ks have training components that you have to discuss. And then somebody just put K for kangaroo, training to carry you along. Exactly. I will add there are administrative supplements that you can get if you have a K award. So I had my son, I was awarded my K in 2021. I got pregnant in 2022, had my son in 2023. So I maintained my training, but I learned that while I was nauseous every day of that 40-week pregnancy and then out for 3 months, yeah, not fun. I was not in the community. I was not actively promoting my study. And I quickly learned that I am the face of my study. So my recruitment numbers are much lower than they should be, given that I'm at the 3-year official mark. So if you have a life event, and it doesn't have to be pregnancy, it might be that you have, you're caring for someone. I would say there's different life events that NIH considers that you can apply for additional funding to support you getting back on track if you have a K. So
Mhm.
I wrote, it has to be within the year of that life event. I wrote the administrative supplement at about the 11th hour, so like at the 11th month, but it was awarded, and so they gave me additional funding to support my recruitment efforts to hopefully get things back where they need to be before the end of the year.
Mhm.
Next slide, please.
Right.
This is me again.
Okay. Mhm. Mhm.
This is me again. Okay. Do you have
Yep.
suggestions on how to pick your mentoring team? So earlier the comment was, do you need a sponsor in your K like you do with an F? And you do, but they just call it a mentor with a K. I have a mentor and then two co-mentors because again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm at the intersections of my mentors. One does dementia caregiving for the caregiver, one does dyadic research regardless of disease process, and then another one looks at health disparities specifically in African American, Black Americans. And so
Mhm.
I am at their intersection. So when you think about your, and then I have several more people, on the mentoring team to help with things. But when you're thinking about your main mentor, you do want them to have NIH funding. It's really important that they do, because if for some reason your K funding doesn't happen, which I haven't known that to be the case, but they like to know that is another sort of funding mechanism that could sustain the work, help you do things. So make sure your main mentor has funding. It might be someone that you've worked with, so a dissertation chair, a postdoc mentor, but just make sure that your K award is different enough from what they're doing. And then that every person on your mentoring team is adding value to either the research you're conducting, or the training you need to learn. So really be very clear. They definitely like to see that everybody on the training plan or the mentoring team is contributing to the training plan and the research in a way that makes sense.
Mhm. And I think it
Yeah.
also helps to have having published or presented with your mentors or co-mentors when you're writing your proposal, to show that you work well with those, chosen mentors.
That's a good point. I had one mentor that I had not worked with. And so what we did is I got on her calendar every month once we decided she was going to be a part of my co-mentoring team. And so we were able to say, we have been meeting monthly over the course of because it takes a while to write the grant, 6 months. So that we have sort of this established relationship, because again, the reviewers want to know that you didn't just randomly pick people, that you do have some sort of a cohesive connection, either through you or one of your mentors, that they will be willing to support you for the length of the grant.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next question is, what was your writing process and what is a good time estimate for the process? So great question. Something to think about ahead of time, right? So I'm a big planner and I love making lists. I don't know if you're like that, Kalisha, but I have a ton of lists. So I was really advised to start from the due date, right? Which for my institution, we have an internal deadline for grants to be submitted to NIH with our Office of Nursing Research. So I knew that my deadline was February 12th for the NIH, but my deadline for Penn internally would be at least 10 business days before that. So, working backwards from that due date is smart to, getting your calendar out and working backwards, but really making a list of all the components that are needed for your case submission is a great place to start. This includes things such as the abstract, data sharing plan, research training plan, all of those components, and all that needs to go together in your submission. So really having a list of what you need to accomplish is really helpful to inform, where you're going to put it on the calendar. And I would say, roughly outlining which documents you're going to complete and, which weeks or which months and what time period is really helpful. So for example, for the month of October, I might complete my, parts of my research strategy, right? I think that's another important component to think about is breaking down, like you have that training plan and then you have your research strategy, but breaking it down into different parts makes it feels less overwhelming. So you might break it down into your, your data sharing plan, and you have your your significance, right? The innovation, like what are those pieces of your work? And I also would say, while you're giving your mentors time to review, like if you've written the research strategy, and then you have to make time to share that with your mentors as well. And keep in mind that they may have vacation or it may be a holiday. So kind of like always adding a little extra time, I think, for a little cushion is smart. Because you're going to have to wait to get their feedback before then you can again go back in and edit and inform that. But also, while they're processing and evaluating your research strategy, that might be a good time for you to start getting organized on the different NIH bio sketches that you need from them. Getting that kind of organized, and then other letters, other support, and then your referee letters. So just kind of being strategic with your time and the different components that you have to kind of complete over that course. But I think it's generally recommended maybe like a 4 to 6 month window when writing a large grant. And some people don't have 6 months to do that. They may have 3 or 4 months. But for me, it was helpful to have extra time. This was my first time writing a grant for the NIH. So it seemed really big and overwhelming, but again, breaking down into parts made it feel more, easy to kind of accomplish and complete those different components. Do you have anything to add to that?
I will add a couple things. I always give myself 6 months to write any big grant because it takes that long. The other thing I try to get out early is letters of support. So the referee letters, letters for my mentors, although those don't have to be done as quickly, but the referee letters, they typically always recommend 3. I always do 4 because when I wrote my F-31, somebody said they would do it and they didn't. And so I'm glad I did 4 because I wouldn't have been able to submit. The other thing is the referee letters go in independent of your own proposal, same as if you've written an F. And so it's just nice to give them ample time. Also at this phase, if you haven't learned, you are typically writing all of those letters too. So I have a letter bank where I just store letters about myself, and then I periodically pull them out and update them and send them to people because, again, as we all know, when we write, it's easier to edit someone else's language or edit our own text versus trying to start from a blank space. The other thing I found really interesting, and I had never done this before, but my mentor has a PhD in English, and I just like how he thinks about writing. Because the candidate mentoring section, the training plan, are heavily weighed, as well as the research, we literally made this really basic outline of like what would be my specific aims, who would be on my mentoring team, and then what would be my training plan. And so looking at that, because again, the idea is that you're a great candidate, you need training in maybe 2 or 3 three areas is what I typically see, 3 areas, and then you'll be amazing. And so making sure that the 3 areas you get training in also are highlighted in your research as your way to sort of practice what you're learning. And so it really does need to be sort of this cohesive piece of specific aims, training plan, and then I have the mentoring team that has the expertise. And you may have to tease out the nuances of that expertise. So like I have one of my goals is to learn how to develop an intervention. And so one of my training plan ideas is intervention mapping. And then I had to have people on my mentoring team that have done interventions. Well, I had my main mentor who's done interventions for dementia care partners, but he hadn't done a dyadic intervention. And so then I needed somebody who has dyadic intervention expertise. And so really just looking at all of those pieces to make sure they fit, which can be time consuming. But again, just wanted to add a couple of little pieces that I personally did. But I think if you have 6 months, take it, because there are a lot of moving pieces.
A lot. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Oh, I forgot to mention, I also had a K writing group. So Dr. Daniel is on, and then Dr. Petrovsky, and I met periodically because we were all writing Ks and submitting about the same time. And so we created our own sort of like writing group to work on different parts of our grant. So it helped with accountability as well.
Oh, that's great. Because then you're like, hey, is this, I think this is what we're supposed to do this for the K. Is that what you understood too? Yeah, that's really helpful. And your program may have, your institution may have some, drafts of things like your data sharing plan or, kind of more general components that you might be able to use as an outline to add to or tweak for your own submission. All right, next question.
Do you have any suggestions, strategies for writing specific parts of the application, like the specific aims page, research strategies, and training plan? I feel like we kind of touched on some of this in least broad strokes.
Yeah.
I think the main thing, like Kat mentioned, is that the specific aims page is going to have a lot of revisions that is going to go back and forth between you and your mentor as many times as it can before your institution says enough is enough and we have to submit it. And so just really giving yourself time to turn that around. And so understanding how your mentor works. So my mentor there were some days I would send him the specific aims page and he might send it back the same day. And so you're going back and forth. There's some times where he would send it back he's super responsive. And so knowing that about your mentor is like, are they super responsive? Will I need to carve out, 2 and 3 touch points a week? Or is it like, no, they're not as responsive as I'd like for them to be. So I really need to take the time, and maybe you have some peers that you send your specific aims page to, like I mentioned. And then, sorry, I think that's my email going out. And then getting it to your mentor, because they will look at it really good maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. And so recognizing that in that 2 or 3 week lull, there are other pieces that still need to be moving. The research strategies is all about like how you're going to do the grant. And so for the most part, if you haven't seen someone's K, you have someone that you trust or know, or your institution may bank K awards, it's always really nice to look at one, because for the most part it's like the purpose, the aim, kind of like the rationale for the aim, who are you gonna what the participants are gonna be, what are the participants gonna do, so kind of that methods approach. And then always sort of a like, what happens if things go awry? So they always want to know like, what will you do if your findings aren't significant or you aren't able to recruit the way you thought you would? And so really having I am blanking on what it's called, but it's not
Like
limitation.
backup plan, like
yes, but there is a backup plan that they want to know about.
You've thought through it, like,
Yes, because
comprehensively.
Again, things don't go the way you need them to in the real world. I am living proof. And then with the training plan, I will say what I've always been told is courses they really like to see courses reviewers do, or workshops. And so really sort of making sure whatever those main things that you need training on are covered with different types of didactics. So is it that you're doing a one-on-one with one of your mentors who's an expert in that area? Are you taking a workshop? Are you taking a course? I will say at this big age of research, I am not a fan of courses that require that I get a letter grade. So on my own K, I put in a couple courses and I hadn't exactly talked to the professor, but I was like, oh, this looks like it'll fit. And then in talking with the professor, they wanted me to take the course for real, like for a letter grade. And so I was like, oh no, we need to pivot, because again, a grant proposal is a proposal and it's not a contract. So let me pivot to a workshop, 4-day workshop, 5-day workshop, 2-day workshop, because usually we don't have a lot of time to commit to doing all of the work. And it was like a 4-hour course, so it was like really intensive. 1-hour courses, 2-hour courses, those can work with the time requirements, plus all the writing you'll be doing for the other things you have going on. But that's not for this section, actually. It's for what I've learned, which is in the next section, but that's one thing I've learned.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I also was told that the training plan is just as important as the research strategy. Yeah.
Probably even more so. I feel like I got more
Okay.
comments
So
on
you
my
kind of
training plan.
did you? Yeah. And you did kind of cover a little bit about this last question.
So there are a couple things. What do I wish I knew when applying that I know now? Put a student in every year of your K, because there was questions about, well, this is a training grant and you're the one that's supposed to be doing the work. Are you allowed to have a student? Yes, you're allowed to have a student, and put one in every year for at least 5 to 10 hours a week. Because everybody else for the most part is going to be in kind on your grant, and so they won't be using any effort. So if you can swing it, have a student, at least one. What's something else I've learned? Recruitment is a lot harder than you think it is. Like, I thought it was going to be hard, but it's even harder than I thought it was going to be. So make sure you have some sort of funding, if possible, set aside to recruitment. I didn't have any funding. I put no dollars towards recruitment at all. Like, I guess I just thought the people were going to fall out the sky and want to participate. So yes, if you can do, can't. I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah, if you can swing it, just some money. I am learning, if your institution has a CTSA, or they're called slightly different things at different institutions, reach out to them. They do have pots of money. I'm just now working with them about doing some ads with Facebook or Instagram, and they are actually going to cover the first month of the ads for me, which I thought was kind of nice. So just thinking about recruitment efforts, I did make some recruitment videos kind of early along in the process that I haven't really used as much, but how can you be effective in recruitment? That's another area. And then you are going to learn so much. I think that's the thing, that even if I don't get the anticipated numbers, there's so much I've learned with, like, oh, bots is another thing. So I do a lot of recruiting online, and so really being strategic and having enough touch points. So I have a pre-screening survey that's online. From there, I review the pre-screening survey, and then I have what I call a scheduling call, which is where I physically talk to you on the phone and I say, I'm going to use the number that you put in your pre-screening survey. Sometimes people will write back and say, oh no, don't use that number, which always makes my little hairs in the back of my neck stand up. If it's a Google Voice number, be aware. If they're changing their gender, because again, my research is sort of gendered. I'm focusing on adult daughters, so there's been some differences in who they said they were at one point, at different points. Just be careful. I did get catfished on one of my first time. If you are doing anything online, make sure you require that they show their video at least when they are going to be consented. So that you can see the people, talk to the people, get a feel for whether or not they are actually who they say they are, because there are several people in other more developing countries really, using research as a way, I think, to fund other things and not really being who they say they are. So working with your IRB about how to be strategic and what to think about. The other thing is never putting all of your inclusion exclusion criteria on your flyer. Don't put everything on there because then people know exactly how to answer it.
Yeah.
I see another question in the chat.
I was also going to say,
Yeah, go ahead.
for writing, my experience in writing the grant, sometimes I would get really excited about a new idea that I had, and I would like go down a tangent, almost like a rabbit hole, and write all kinds of things about this, addition to what I had started. And then, I would say I learned do broad strokes first and get feedback before you go down a rabbit hole on a new idea or a tangent. Because it might not, you might be advised that it's not a path you should go down. So really getting those broad strokes first, I think, and then getting your feedback is a way to save time and energy. That's one thing I've learned.
Speaking of time, we are almost out of time. I mean, I don't know where it went. I think we have time for this last question that says, what do you do if faculty in your college don't have funding in your research focus? Do you expand your team outside of your college, or is this something you take into consideration in the institution you choose to do your postdoc faculty position in? I will say personally, I have mentors that are outside of my school. And so my main mentor is in the school, in the department I am in, and he was well funded. He had an R1 at the time I was submitting my K. But as far as, so funding is part of the picture. I think the other picture is, does it make sense to have them on your grant proposal because they add value to it? Everybody doesn't have to be fully funded, but if they are bringing something that you need, I think that is enough for them to be on it. But your main mentor should be funded, in my opinion. Kat?
Yeah, no, definitely. I have mentors in my school, but also outside of my school one is for my dissertation committee that I worked with previously, and then another is at a different institution.
I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions, I'll put my email in the, I guess it was at the beginning, but I will put it in the chat. And
Yeah.
Lana, back to you.
Thank you very much, both. Very, very impressive and extensive experience. I hope we can inspire several of researchers here or nursing scientists who want to submit the grant. It's a long journey, everyone, remember? And then we have to get through this. And I think we are in the same boat, and I hope we can inspire each other. And thank you everyone who joined, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.